Cameron about what he's doing in our name in Saudi Arabia. Is he raising issues about individual abuses of human rights, or is he promoting the sale of arms? And if it is arms, what kind of arms and what are they going to be used for? We know that already arms produced in Britain have been used against protesters in other countries in the Middle East. For example, CS gas produced in Britain was used in Egypt against protesters in November. Saudi Arabia has an appalling human rights record. It's already been involved in interventions in Bahrain to assist in putting down the protests there. And I think David Cameron really needs to be answering questions about what it is he's doing in Saudi Arabia and whose side he's on there.
If he raises some of those human rights concerns, is he right to go?
I think he's right to raise the concerns. Whether he does that by going there or whether he does that by staying here is not the important issue in my view. I think the important issue is what our approach is to Saudi Arabia. The Conservative MP, Sir John Stanley, who's chair of the Committee on Arms Exports Control, said in the House of Commons in October that the British government was skating on thin ice in relation to Saudi Arabia, and there's already been many questions asked about why our approach to Saudi Arabia is so different to our approach to other regimes in the region.
But the trouble with this argument, I mean, it harks back to when Labour was in power, and indeed when Labour won the election in 1997. A lot of people will remember talk then of the ethical foreign policy.
Yes.
It's very easy to come up with that idea in opposition. It's very hard to actually produce it in reality in government.
Yes, and in many ways, you know, successive governments have had the same policy.
Including Labour.
Yes, exactly. It's either a Labour government or a Conservative government or a Conservative and Liberal Democrat government that we've had. So yes, successive governments have pursued very similar policies in relation to this area, although of course it was Labour that set up the cross-party Committee on Arms Export Controls, which was about trying to improve transparency on this issue. And it's quite clear that successive governments have failed to recognise the risks of selling arms which can be used for internal repression to authoritarian regimes. We should be learning the lessons of the past. We should be looking at what's happened with the Arab Spring, and we should be saying very clearly that we're not going to allow British weapons to be used on the streets.
Right, even though they are made in British factories by British workers, some of whom might be in your constituency. What would they say to you if you suggested that?
I think there's huge public support for what's happening in the Middle East. It's a huge inspiration throughout the world, and we should be having the kind of foreign policy and the kind of trades policy that actually ensure that we're on the right side. That's in our long-term interests, and that's what Britain should be doing.
There's one more important issue here, isn't there? Our relations with Iran as well as with Saudi Arabia. If we go to Saudi Arabia with the kind of message that you have outlined, the Saudis will be understandably less than happy. They are very nervous about Iran. Our relations with Iran are difficult as well. We are entering a potential maelstrom by doing that, are we not?
Yes, I think we need to be very aware of the power balance between the countries in the Middle East, and indeed policies such as the ones that we fear might be pursued by David Cameron could indeed be very destabilising in that region. And I think we need to have a consistent approach and one that recognises that it's not acceptable for our arms to be used for internal repression.
Despite 6 years of promises, U.S. officials say Saudi Arabia continues to look the other way at a list of wealthy individuals sending millions of dollars to al-Qaeda.
If I could somehow snap my fingers and cut off the funding from one country, it would be from Saudi Arabia.
In a rare public scolding, the top U.S. official in charge of tracking terror financing, Stuart Levy, told ABC News Saudi Arabia has dropped the ball.
When the evidence is clear that these individuals have funded terrorist organizations and knowingly done so, then that should be prosecuted and treated as real terrorism, because it is.
In Saudi Arabia, how many such people have been prosecuted?
As far as I know, there have not been any.
Not a single one?
No.
U.S. officials point to men like Yassin al-Qadi, a wealthy businessman, put on the U.S. and UN list of al-Qaeda financiers 1 month after the 9/11 attacks. Al-Qadi, who has consistently denied the allegation, remains free, still a prominent figure in the region.
And he remains designated to the United Nations for his material support to al-Qaeda.
More than 4,000 Iraqi civilians have died in suicide attacks in the past 6 months. and Saudi Arabia bears much of the blame, according to Iraqi National Security Advisor Mofak al-Rubai.
Most of the foreign terrorists who are blowing themselves up in this country are coming from Saudi Arabia.
The Iraqis and the U.S. military here claim 60 to 80 terrorist recruits a month enter Iraq, half of them from Saudi Arabia. They travel to the Syrian capital Damascus, then cross this long and porous border into Iraq. Rubai said he asked the Saudi government to crack down harder on would-be jihadists and to restrict movement of funds to Sunni extremist factions, especially those linked with al-Qaeda.
We would love to have our American allies put more pressure and more convincing on the Saudi government.
One of Iraq's most hard-line Sunni leaders, Harith al-Dari, visited the kingdom last month, where Rubai claimed he was publicly praised by King Abdullah as a mujahideen or holy warrior.
The United Kingdom Prime Minister, David Cameron, is making business deals in Saudi Arabia with state sponsors of terrorists who are killing British soldiers in Afghanistan. And while David Cameron is betraying our brave soldiers to the Saudi enemy, he times a row with the SNP, hoping we will not notice Cameron's treason. Discuss with me, Peter Dow, and other viewers of this video by registering your own username account with the For Freedom forums.